OK, let's get into our first topic then, and we're asking if you're out of pocket and whether you think it is the Conservative Party's fault. Get your calls in for this now. So a new report has found that the average person is £10,000 worse off compared to 2010. Our disposable income and savings have fallen over the last 14 years, and people are out of pocket in 56 of the country's largest towns and cities. Centre for Cities, who wrote the report, says that this is partly due to a fall in productivity. They also point out the rise in house prices, which has eaten into people's incomes. But since the Conservative Party came into power back in 2010, are they the ones to blame? I think it's only fair we start with you. Dehenna, what do you reckon?
I'm shocked you came to me first on this one. Look, you have to look into what the report's really saying, and it's not saying that people are 10 grand worse off per se. It's saying that because of sort of stagnant growth since 2010, the potential that we could have had if growth had continued would have people £10,000 better off. That context is really important. So naturally, you would expect me to do a bit of digging to see what the context is like in other countries. And when you look at real terms growth from 2010 to the best figures I could find were 2021, in Germany, always thought of as a really high productive, high growth economy. They were on 1.2% real growth across that period. The UK was on 1.2% across that period. You look at France, 0.9%. You look at Japan, always thought of as a high growth economy, 0.5%. So I think that comparison is really important. And also, one of the things that I think we forget is what the Conservatives did when we first came into power in 2010 with regards to the national minimum wage and with regards to personal income tax thresholds. I did some sort of back of fag packet calculations just myself here, which I hope are about accurate. But what I found was that in roughly real terms, your inflation across that period was 47.8%. But if you're a full-time worker on the minimum wage, the impact of the increase in minimum wage from 2010 to 2023, plus the impact of the personal income tax threshold rising, so basically a tax cut, means that you're 81.4% better off in your income. 81.4% growth in that versus 47.8% for those the lowest paid in society. That is a good thing, but I think the problem at the moment, people are not necessarily feeling better off. And that's the thing, it's how people are feeling. Now, are the Conservatives to blame for that? Again, context is really important. The world has faced a crisis with COVID. Europe has faced a crisis when it comes to energy bills because of what's going on in Ukraine. There's a lot of context. And I think any government in power would have seen very similar things happening with inflation and with low growth over the past few years.
Even if you look at the stats that you just gave or the report that's just come out, the fact is we're in a cost of living crisis in this country. And there are a few things that could point towards that. One of which a lot of people who are going to call are probably going to say Liz Truss. So doesn't the Conservative Party have to take some responsibility for this?
Any government in power has to take some responsibility for the actions. But what I'd say is that some of the impacts could have been mitigated by much longer term planning. So we think about energy and energy resilience, for example. Energy bills, I think, are one of the key things people have been worried about, certainly last winter and, the winter before, given how much the prices had risen. If the UK had better energy resilience and energy security, homegrown, more nuclear, more renewables, for example, that means you wouldn't have to rely on those foreign imports. And that's long-term decisions. That's Labour going back from 97. It's the Tories back in the 80s. It's a long-term thing, and I think that has to be a focus of any government moving forward, is our own energy security here in Britain.
It is probably true, Marina. The Conservatives have a lot of things they could point to give reasons why we might feel less well off, and certainly, according to this report, are less well off.
And they will do, just as you have. You've done the typical Tory trickonomics thing, pull out some random figures that sound all right, but actually you've just got to look at what do you feel like? How far are your wages stretching? What do they cover? And the fact is, this report has unearthed it, people are poorer. And it's looking at disposable income. So let's be really clear and look at what your disposable income is impacted by. It's taxes. They're the highest they've been since the Second World War. It's your rent. There's a shortage of houses. There's no houses being built. Or it's your mortgage, thanks Liz Truss. Or it's your energy bills. Again, second highest on the planet, I think. Food inflation, Brexit. And also, you point to all these countries doing worse than us. You're one of these champions of Brexit. We're not supposed to be comparing ourselves with the countries doing the worst. We're supposed to have been, it was supposed to be a golden era for post-Brexit Britain.
Marina,
and actually, you compare us to Germany. Germany are in the position where, they have to wean themselves off Russian energy. So they're in in a really tricky spot. But we were supposed to be doing better. Every single thing that I've just listed there is all down to government mismanagement, and the Tories are to blame for everything. I just hope people start to see that they are responsible for the fact that you can't afford what you used to be able to afford.
When the Conservative Party came to power, there was a note left in the Chancellor's desk saying that there is no money
I'm so glad
left.
you raised this, Storm. I'm so glad you raised this. Labour, when Labour left office, the government debt was 811 billion. That was after 13 years in power, and that was after they bailed out the banks because of the financial crisis. Tories, do you know what we're at now? 2.54 trillion. That's over, for the first time, that's over 100% of GDP. We have to pay for that. And also, look around. What works?
So I have
what is our money spent on?
I have a question. Would you not have done furlough?
100%.
So you would have done
do you know what? This is. I knew you. Do you know what? I'm so glad because I knew you were going to say that.
I'm sure you
do you know what furlough cost us? £70 billion. In the grand scheme of things, £70 billion to bail out a country told to stay at home. That's nothing. That's literally shrapnel you find down the sofa. I'm talking about the hundreds of. I'm talking about the hundred of billions of pounds that we have wasted, the government has wasted and frittered and siphoned and just corruptly spent. And nothing is better. The health service, schools, our councils are all looking to go bankrupt. Like, nothing is better. They are so shoddy. I wouldn't let them take charge of like a tenner to go to the shops and buy some milk.
So furlough clearly wasn't the biggest spend in terms of COVID.
It was a factor. I mean,
£70 billion,
in terms of the debt rising, the most significant rise came off the back of the COVID pandemic. But we have to remember something here.
2.54 trillion,
Marina,
70 billion in 2.54 trillion is nothing.
May I?
Go for it.
Thank you, I appreciate it. We have to look at where we are. I like to think about the sort of government debt sort of settlement as like credit card debt. It makes it a bit easier for me to understand on a personal level. The problem is, when we came into power in 2010, the deficit was so significant. Every month we were overspending. Every month we were spending on our credit card. We were put in place austerity in 2010 to try and get that under control.
That worked really well, didn't it?
Initially it did, actually.
No, it's not. Nothing about austerity. The austerity has now resulted in more inequality. We've got part of the reason for our low productivity is we've got a very inactive and sick country. Why are they sick? Oh, it's those record waiting lists, for example, and mental health. Like no one's been dealt with their mental health.
This is where the
austerity has been proven. Austerity has been proven to have killed over 100,000 people. This didn't work. No one benefited.
I'm really not going to let this one go, because the point is, if you're spending on your credit card every single month, the debt rises. But
Margaret Thatcher tried to trick people with this household budget, credit card budget. It doesn't work like that. If you invest in infrastructure, it actually pays back.
Okay, let Dehenna finish her point.
2 points. Firstly, our monthly debt repayments now are larger than our entire education budget. Mm-hmm. That's wrong.
That's mismanagement.
And that started way back in the Labour years. Let's also talk about PFI. Let's invest in infrastructure. Great, I agree. You don't do it on a credit card. You don't do it on a buy now, pay later, which is effectively what Labour did in 1997.
They had to bail out the banks to stop everything collapsing. Gordon Brown is blamed for it. Actually,
PFI was pre that. Hospitals built in 2000, 2001 on PFI deals, contracts that we are still paying off way over the prices.
I wonder how much that costs in the grand scheme of things compared to what the Tories have wasted.
Marina.
Tories have wasted £100 billion since 2019. The Tories have wasted.
Okay, let me go to calls. Stephen from Merseyside, what's your thoughts on this? Do you feel less well off?
100% less well off, and I'm just listening to the panel there. Really good points that people are making, but I think some people are living in a Westminster bubble. To live now, rents and mortgages have gone up really increasingly. I feel, as a Generation X, I'm okay. But the majority of people in the Northwest are really struggling just to live, to pay for the energy, to pay for the fuel monopoly that the Tories are involved with. Well, the austerity measures that they brought in to give themselves an increase in wage, and that everybody else has gone down. 0 hours contracts, food banks usage has increased. The cost of students is phenomenal to become a student, just to get on and to
Stephen, sorry, I don't know whether your line cut off there, but if I could just interject, a lot of what you're talking about there is the cost of living crisis. And I suppose the Conservative government would argue that actually that's been impacted hugely by, for example, the war in Ukraine and the cost of energy. Can the Conservative really take responsibility for that? They're trying to mitigate some factors that they're not responsible for. Stephen? we've lost you. Hopefully we'll get you back. I wasn't sure whether the line just went down. But Marina, I'll put that point to you, that actually there are huge things going on out with our control.
Right, our energy bills. Do people understand that our energy bills are 3 or 4 times more expensive than other EU countries? What is that down to? Why are we special? Like, it's the fact that we've had 10 years, and the Labour government did it as well, but not investing in renewables, not investing in nuclear. Also, Liz Truss, like, I think it was her that, who's one of your bezies, like, wanted to siphon off, sell off our gas storage. So we didn't maintain our gas storage. Why don't we invest in our homes? We've got the leakiest homes, again, in Europe with regards to our insulation, and no one wants to invest in this. Oh, and Kelsey Paris, look at our sky-high energy bills and a government that won't impose proper windfall taxes.
So Marina's saying that, yes, there are external factors coming in, but actually we are suffering far more than other countries. What would you say to that?
Well, it's the point I made in my sort of opening remarks about longer-term energy resilience, something that I think for decades politicians have shied away from, because it's difficult as a politician when you operate on a kind of 5-year cycle. You're looking for those quick wins you can point to at the general election. And if you sign off a nuclear power station today that's not going to come live for 10, 15, 20 years, clearly you're not going to get the kind of political benefit from that. But it's still the right thing to do, and it's something we absolutely need to focus on moving forward.
Are you pro-fracking, out of curiosity?
I don't know, if I'm completely honest. I'm pro us taking control of our own energy supplies, but I'm not fully convinced by the science on fracking yet.
Yeah. So, but what's the argument against this? Because it is an excuse that every government that's ever been in power would use, is the short-term thinking and the short-term planning because they're going to another election. Yeah. How do we solve that issue?
I think politicians need to be brave, need to be bold, and need to be unafraid to take these big decisions. And it's really difficult, particularly when you've got new polls coming out left, right and centre. We're down 5 points. It's easy to get distracted by the short term for any politician, I think. We need to be brave enough to tackle the long-term issues.
I think it's actually about getting politicians who genuinely care, who are in the job for the right reasons. Because if you're in the job for the right reasons, you do just put in place the right policies for the country because you care for the country. If you're like Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson or Liz Truss and you just care for your own power and wealth, then you will put out whatever policies will get you a headline.
I could understand the point, but I guess there's different ways to look at this. One might argue that if you genuinely believe that, for me, conservatism, for others, liberalism, whatever, if you genuinely believe that conservatism is better for the country, is better for people, then surely the short-term politics does matter, because you want to stay in power, not for the sake of staying in power, but because you think it's going to be better for the country. So you have to take into account the short-term stuff too. We've
got some really interesting messages here. Mick on Facebook says, no, Labour are to blame for being unelectable for the last 14 years and letting the Tories do what they want. Marina?
Interesting point.
Do you think that's fair point?
There's a tiny bit of truth to that, I think. But I think we also need to look at the press landscape, which is dominated by the Tories, who get to write their headlines and they've got front pages at their disposal to put whatever they want on there and just brainwash a nation.
Dan on Facebook says, yes, we are meant to be a rich country. The problem is that money is being spent on other countries for aid and not helping this country. Is that fair? I mean, how much are we actually putting? I think we're spending 2.4 billion a year in Ukraine when we're spending 8 billion and filling in potholes. It doesn't feel like
it's a drop in the ocean, really. I mean, I can understand why people feel that, though. If you see kind of cash being handed to other nations, if you take the view that the government's first and foremost job is to protect its own citizens and its own country, I get it. Just
to add, people need to stop believing that, because even if foreign aid was zero, that money is never going to go to the people in society that really need it. You just need to look at the conversation around inheritance tax, where 96% of people or households are not going to benefit from that, and yet 4% are. And look at that; it's being tabled as something they're going to look into.
We glossed over that a little bit, but is that somewhere where you guys actually agree that the amount we spend on foreign aid is an acceptable amount, or do you think we spend too much?
I think we have an obligation as one of the richest countries in the world to help other countries. I do have an issue with when that foreign aid is spent in countries where they've got loads of money and they don't need it, and also going into areas of development which I don't think needs to happen. It should be going to the most desperate countries where there are food issues, and like Ukraine, for example. But no, I'd question some of them. But the amount is right. Okay. It's how it gets spent.
OK, we've got Elizabeth from Nottingham on the line now. Elizabeth, what's your thoughts? Are you feeling less well off?
Well, I'm a pensioner, and I would just like to say that we're a working class family, we always have been, and we've always voted Tory. I think it's a world situation we're in at the moment due to several things, the wars and different things. I don't think you can just blame one party. I think if Labour were in charge, they would be in exactly the same position.
Hold on, Elizabeth. Let Marina come back to you on that.
Are you aware that you've got one of the lowest pensions in Europe?
I am. We always have had. Nothing new.
So why are you happy with that?
Because I'm not greedy.
Okay, fair
Elizabeth,
enough. You're happy.
Wouldn't the argument also be that this £10,000 you are less well off may not be for you because your pension is being protected by the triple lock? You don't have to potentially, and I don't know your situation individually, you don't have to look for a new house. You're not trying to get on the property ladder.
No, I'm not. No. But I have grandchildren and I have children, and they save up. They don't have things they can't afford.
No, but I wonder whether they can afford the same things that you could when you were younger, Elizabeth. Are they
I would imagine so, because when I was younger, it was even harder.
Are they going to be able to buy a house, Elizabeth, your kids?
I would think so. They've all got good jobs. They've all studied hard at school and at college, yeah.
Outright, with no help?
Not from me.
Interesting.
You must be really proud of them.
You must be incredibly proud of them, and that's incredible for you.
Of course.
I think the general public, though, would feel differently, that actually the younger generation aren't as able to freely buy a house as the older generations have been in the past. And certainly with only a single member in the family working, it used to be just the man went out to work. Now mum and dad are having to go out and work, and that brings up so many other issues. But yeah, I mean, Dehenna, you take that point that actually it is harder now for younger people than older people. Maybe the Conservative Party haven't done enough to really help that generational split.
Yeah, I think actually this again is a generations-long kind of lack of investment in housing in particular. Housing, as we know, it's the biggest issue, isn't it, for young people? Rent prices, particularly in the big capital cities, especially in London, are crazy. Crazy.
And childcare costs. Childcare costs as well.
But the Conservative Party did the right to buy. That was Margaret Thatcher. That got rid of loads of council houses. Labour probably didn't build enough houses when they were in power, and the Conservative Party have continued that. So I think maybe the Conservative Party has to take the biggest brunt on that.
To an extent. I mean, we've put in place some measures like the Help to Buy, which has been really successful. A few of my friends managed to access the housing market through Help to Buy, which I think is really positive. The thing that I don't understand, which was a Liz Truss idea, bear with me, was why mortgage assessments, mortgage affordability assessments can't be based on a series track record on rent.
Agreed.
If you've managed to pay your rent successfully for 3 years and your mortgage payment will be lower, I don't understand why that can't be taken into account. And that was something that Liz as Prime Minister was looking at changing. I'd still like to see us do that, actually.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea.
So much we could have covered in that debate. I think we covered about half of it, but we are going to have to move on. Thanks very much for all your calls on that after the break.